Hey there, it's Dr. Justin Marcagiani. Welcome to Beyond Wellness Radio, where we provide actionable health information on a week-to-week basis that can help you improve your life. Feel free, head over to justinhealth.com, where we have various opt-in video series on more in-depth health topics such as female hormones, thyroid, and gut health. Also, while you're there, feel free and schedule a consult with myself, Dr. J, and or my colleagues. We're available worldwide to provide natural health support for any of your major health issues. Again, welcome to the podcast and enjoy the show. And we are live. It's Dr. J here in the house with Evan Brand. Today, we're going to be chatting about anti-nutrients in food. Anti-nutrients are one of these controversial topics because a lot of plants have a lot of nutrients in them, right? Blueberries, right? Raspberries, a lot of these really good, like spinach, things like that, right? But they have some of these things known as anti-nutrients, whether it's oxalates or phytates or salicylates, right? These are kind of under the overall umbrella of phenols, right? Polyphenols. And for people that are sensitive and have gut issues and immune stress, this may be something that actually causes more harm than good. If you have good gut health, the nutrients in those food are going to be obviously beneficial. So it just depends kind of where you sit in that scale. But today we're going to dive in and break it down. Evan, how are we doing today, man?
Oh, I'm doing really well. And I'll tell a quick story and then we'll dive into this thing. So I noticed that my daughter was complaining after I gave her blueberries. We do some organic wild blueberries. I may give those to her just on a plate, just as a snack, or I may just put those in a smoothie and we'll do like some grass-fed beef peptides. And then I noticed, she said, "Daddy, my tummy hurts." And I thought, that's interesting. And I correlated it to the blueberries. And upon researching into salicylates, the quote, very high category of salicylate foods would be blueberries, cherries, blackberries, apricots, orange, pineapple, raisin, strawberries, tangerines. And then lower than that, like high, but not very high, you got apples, you have avocados, you have mandarin, nectarine, passion fruit, peach. And then like your very, very low salicylates would be like pear or banana or pawpaw, which we have here, a lot of pawpaw trees in Kentucky. That's kind of a native fruit. They're kind of weird, but some people really
Pawpaw, huh?
like them.
That's weird.
Yeah, they're cool. They're a cool tree, but it's a pretty short tree and they've got a pawpaw fruit on it. It's kind of an interesting thing. But anyhow, so long story short, I've determined there's definitely a trigger. And
Totally.
we've talked about this before with like paleo and more carnivore type diets. The idea is that if you just go more meat-based, animal-based diet, you're really pulling a lot of these anti-nutrients out. And that's why people feel better. But that still doesn't get to the root cause of why you're having the intolerance in the first place. So I think it's important you and I eventually get to that. I think it's good. We're going to give some backstory and education. But I think it's important to point out early on here that if you have a sensitivity to these foods, it's not to mean that you can't or shouldn't eat those foods. It's you got to figure out, why are you so sensitive? And there are some big root causes we're going to dive into.
Exactly. Now, I like to have a lot of common sense, try to be like the mayor of Realville here, right? So if you're coming in and you're listening to this podcast and you're on like a standard American diet, so to speak, don't worry about it. We're just trying to get you to eat whole foods that are nutrient dense, anti-inflammatory, and low toxin. Like that's our first step out of the gates. This is all window dressing, right? So once you've been doing the right diet, doing the right thing, and you're still having some gut issues, some immune issues, this is kind of where we're going to come in and fine tune things after the fact. So if you're coming in and you're like, man, this is like telling me I can't eat blueberries. Like everyone's telling me blueberries are healthy. What the heck, right? I get it. That could be really overwhelming. So don't worry about that out of the gates. Just really get a good nutrient-dense, anti-inflammatory, low-toxin, get your carbs in check out of the gate. Start with that before you do anything else. Any comments on that, Evan?
Yeah, well said. And if you're coming in and you're new to the diet game, nutrition game, really just organic as much as possible. And paleo is going to be a great starting place for you. We don't want you to be afraid of certain foods or certain food categories. This is more of like a nutrition 301, nutrition 401 level course.
Yes.
This is like a college level nutrition course, because if you come in and now, like you said, you're afraid of blueberries, you're going to be too stressed. So this is more designed for people that are maybe working with us clinically, or they're working with another, functional medicine practitioner, and they're maybe still teasing apart some things that are irritating them. This is going to be for you guys.
Exactly. So 90% of people are going to go on some kind of a paleo or autoimmune template, and that's going to be enough, right? Others are going to have to do things like cooking the food can decrease some of these anti-nutrients. It can decrease some of the oxalates, some of the salicylates, some of the phytates, right? We know things like nuts are very high in phytates, for instance. Soaking those can be helpful. Obviously, going on an autoimmune diet, we're going to restrict nuts, right? So kind of going autoimmune, we're going to be restricting a lot of these foods just in general. Going paleo, you kind of restrict a lot of them because there's a lot of anti-nutrients in grains. So grains are going to be a big anti-nutrient one. Beans and lentils are going to be a big anti-nutrient one. So just by kind of getting on board of a paleo template where we're cutting out grains, legumes, and dairy, maybe we have some meat, some vegetables, some fruits, some safe starches. Safe starches are grain-free starches, and maybe some fats, including some dairy. That's great. We may have to go one level up where we restrict even butter and dairy, and of course, even nuts and seeds, right? And then, of course, after that, we may have to be doing extra things like restricting FODMAPs because of the fermentable carbohydrates that are in some of these healthy foods like broccoli and Brussels sprouts. And again, the reason why these foods have to be restricted is not because the foods themselves are bad, but because it's more of the gut, your microbiome's interaction with those foods that are the problem. So if we have bacterial overgrowth, right, and you're interacting with these foods, then you're going to be creating lots of gases in your intestinal tract, like methane and hydrogen, that are going to throw off your motility, that are going to make it harder to digest your food, to absorb your food, to break down protein, to break down fat. So it can really throw off a lot of these different things. So I always tell patients out of the gate, the goal is to eat the right foods that allow you to feel as good as possible, not add more stress on your body. And ideally, your body can break them down, because healthy foods not broken down, they ferment, they acidify, they putrefy, and they basically rot inside your tummy, and that's not good. So we have to have those kind of things lined up. And some people with autoimmune stuff, we have to go and restrict the salicylates or the oxalates. And again, for instance, I see a lot of chronic eczema patients. Sometimes we really have to go low salicylate on eczema. I see that a lot with eczema. Salicylates are a big one. So I have a handout that I use with patients. I'll pull it up here in a second, where we kind of work on restricting a lot of the salicylates and potentially some of the oxalates. If we see a lot of vulvodynia, like just random like joint pain, tissue pain, a lot of times those oxalate crystals can get into that tissue and really create inflammation. And we can assess that with a specific organic acid test to know if there's oxalates there. And we can also look at a lot of the underlying skin stuff that we see. There's a lot of chronic eczema that's not getting better with an autoimmune diet. We may look at going low salicylate as well. So there's a lot of different tools we have in our tool bag, but all of it comes back to the gut. We have to work on the 6 R's, removing the bad foods. We may have to go deeper, like I mentioned, with the other foods, cooking the foods really well, nothing raw, really working on enzymes and acids and bile support, really working on gut healing support, anti-inflammatory support for the gut. That's going to be the foundation before we go in and address gut killing, because gut killing can be stressful on the gut, and you have to have those first 2 to 3 R's lined up to mitigate damage.
Yep. And you brought up the organic acids test. We've seen too clinically the correlation between candida overgrowth and oxalates being high. So interestingly enough, when we come in and we use a protocol, like you're mentioning, we'll come in and address gut infections, whether it's parasites, worms, H. pylori, fungal overgrowth, we'll see those oxalate markers come down quite a bit. So in a lot of cases where people are sensitive to these food groups, finding the gut infections and then fixing those gut infections can reduce the sensitivity. So this is the problem I have with people that are just strictly nutritionists, is they can avoid going deep enough, and you could just keep tweaking the diet. And someone may say, yeah, I feel better with low salicylate, low oxalate. And then they think that's just their life sentence, but that's really boring over time. And I think there are beneficial antioxidants in the foods that you will miss out on. So I think it is important to be able to have a varied diet. I'm a huge fan of animal-based diet, but I'm still wanting to do some nuts and seeds and blueberries and maybe some starch here and there. Here's one interesting thing I wanted to read, which is that excess salicylates work similarly in the body as oxalates, that they both can lead to inflammation. And what they're going to do is they're going to create the overproduction of leukotrienes. And these are inflammatory mediators that can increase the risk of health issues like asthma and inflammatory bowel disease. And you also mentioned skin issues. So I'm sure the histamine connection is definitely part of it too. And that's why we see benefit with things like quercetin or natural antihistamines with these type of people. They tend to do better.
Yep. 100%. Because we're having a major effect on modulating the immune system. So that makes a big difference, right? And then, of course, making sure we're able to break down our foods using things like an Instant Pot, to help break down the foods. Be careful of things like crock pots, just because the longer cooking can increase histamine. A lot of people who are sensitive to these phenols or salicylates or oxalates or phytates, they also tend to be histamine sensitive. So it's overwhelming for people out of the gates that have a lot of immune imbalances, because they really have to restrict a lot of stuff. And so, some have to go to carnivore. They need fresher meats. They need to cook it up in a more fast way. They need to not have a lot of leftovers hanging around for days later because of the histamine accumulation. So those are the things you got to be very, very careful of. Also, people feel better fasting. That's also a good sign. When you're fasting, you're not eating any food. So you're also not eating the things that are making you sick either. And so a lot of times, part of the reason why fasting is great for a lot of people isn't just necessarily because of the cellular autophagy and the insulin resistance and all those mTOR pathways, being reduced. You're just not eating things that are making you sick. Even if they're healthy things, like blueberries in your daughter, for instance, no one would be like, oh, that's like junk food. Of course that'd make her sick. No, that wouldn't go on most people's radar screens, but we know that there's some anti-nutrients that could be a driving factor in that.
It's interesting how berries, if you think of the just amazing evolution of fruit, and you think of the most vulnerable, most soft, easily ruined fruit, you're going to think of the berries. I mean, you think of raspberries. I mean, I've seen countless times where I pick them up at the store or at a farmer's market, and man, those things in less than a week, those things are going moldy. They're getting soft and gooey. So it makes sense why salicylates are so high in the berries, because essentially what it is a natural pesticide, and it's a natural antifungal. So the goal is the plant is trying to protect itself so that it can get to the proper stage and development that it wants to. So what does it do? Well, it doesn't have teeth to bite the offender, so it has to create some sort of mechanism, and that mechanism is salicylates to protect it, versus something like an avocado. It's got that nice outer shell protecting it, so it doesn't have to be as high in salicylates because it's already protected. So that's just a really cool thing to think about how nature works.
And then animals don't have any of that, because animals have teeth and the ability to, fight back from a certain bit. So you have less anti-nutrients on the animal side. And that's why you see a lot of these carnivore groups pop up that are like, oh my gosh, like look at all my autoimmunity is reversed. Why? Well, it's because animals don't have the need for anti-nutrients, because they have claws or hooves or can run and can fight, so to speak, right? And so you have less anti-nutrients in a lot of these animal products. So when you see a lot of people reversing significant autoimmune condition with carnivore or semi-carnivore diets, and again, a carnivore diet is an autoimmune diet. It's a low FODMAP diet too. It's also low salicylate, so it's low anti-nutrient as well. But you see these stories, and the question is why? And most people, they're very dogmatic about it. It's like, oh no, it's this diet, this is what did it, and they don't really understand the mechanism of what's actually happening biochemically and physiologically. They're just they look at it more like a religion than it is like, let's just break down the science, right? Let's look at reason, logic, and evidence. And so the reason, logic, and evidence is reducing these anti-nutrients. And then also we chatted about off show, a lot of times these salicylates and phenols and anti-nutrients become more of a problem is when we have low sulfur or low glutathione to run a lot of our detoxification pathways. And a lot of times these sulfur and nutrients have a major effect on modulating our immune system too.
Yeah, well, here's the interesting thing. You've got these people that are going on the diets. So I need to look him up. George St. Pierre. He's a pretty
I think, isn't he a fighter?
MMA.
He's a fighter. Yeah.
I don't know if he still is or if he's retired or what his deal is. But anyway, I've seen him posting that he's gone to carnivore diet. He was doing like a 30-day carnivore challenge, talking about how much better he feels. And he's posting all these pictures of his steaks. And so like you said, it does become kind of religion, like, okay, it's the vegan versus the meat group. But I think it's more important to highlight, okay, he's probably got something going on in his gut that's driving his autoimmune issue or whatever his issues were that led him to more meat-based diet. And you could do meat, and remove all the anti-nutrients, sure, but what did you not address? And that's the problem that I have, is when people are going to go and just eat a grass-fed steak twice a day and that's it for their diet, or maybe a handful of this or that, they're still missing the deeper things. So let's talk about that. Let's dive into more of these bigger things, because people are not going to investigate it. They're just going to do the diet. They're going to feel better. And that's as far as it goes. They're never going to talk about what you and I are hitting on, which is, you mentioned.
Yeah, and I'll just hit one more thread real fast. People that would go on, like, let's say a meat only diet or a carnivore based diet, and they feel worse. Why is that? Right? They're going to just think, oh, it's the animal products that did it. It's like, no, animal products are very taxing on your digestive system. So if you have inadequacies in HCl or enzymes or even bile salts, that weakness will be exposed by eating the meat, because you may not have enough acid or enzyme or bile to break down that protein and fat. Therefore, that food's going to feel like a brick in your stomach. You're going to feel indigestion. You're going to feel bloating. You're going to feel motility issues. And so that could throw you off too. And so if you are going to go carnivore or make changes in these diets, low-hanging fruit always is going to be how we cook the food, even if it's plants, right? Because just steaming and putting our plants in some kind of a stew or soup, or just even roasting it, way better than raw. And then, of course, enzymes and acids and potentially bile if our stool is not being broken down well, if it's floating, right? Those are all signs of not breaking down fat. And so we have to really make sure those foundational pieces are addressed.
Oh yeah, that's a great call, because you're going to have a large percentage of the people that do great, but then you're going to have these people say, "Oh, I tried carnivore and I felt terrible on meats." It's not the meats you're pointing out. It's not, I just want to say it in a different way. It's not necessarily the meats that's the problem. It's your system can't handle it. Everyone's system can and should be able to handle meats. This is what we evolved to eat, but it's the matter of the underlying infection. So like the H. pylori reducing the stomach acid, now you've got low HCl. You're going to try to do meats. You're probably going to be having tons of gas. You might have diarrhea because you just simply can't break down the fat and the protein. And you and I are going to measure this, right? We're not going to just say, hey, try this diet or try that. We're going to do the testing to investigate. And what we may see on the stool, we might see high steatocrit, which is a fecal fat marker. We may see low pancreatic elastase. We may see high calprotectin. There's gut inflammation. And then we may see these root causes, which I want to transition into: the bacterial overgrowth, the parasites, the worms, all these infections, which are disrupting the gut, creating the leaky gut, which is then allowing the histamines, the oxalates, the salicylates to become a problem. So let's dive into one thing, which is mold toxin. We know that mold toxin is definitely going to affect detoxability, and it can create a mast cell problem. And I've dealt with mast cell problems myself. I'm slowly but surely getting better and better and better by doing two things. Number one, eliminating the mold toxin using binders. And then number two, stabilizing the mast cells using things like quercetin and other mast cell nutrients. Nettle can be helpful, vitamin C to help degrade histamine, DAO with food to help digest the histamine you're putting in the diet. So I think toxins in general, maybe not just mold, but I think we could say toxins, heavy metals, pesticide, herbicide, anything that's disrupting the gut is going to be important to look for with testing and then to treat.
100%. Yeah. Especially if you can get to the root cause, right? If you're in a moldy home right now, we got to look at that. We got to address it. If you have high levels of mold out of the bat, but you're not in a moldy home, it may be less important to jump on board with detoxification if you already have a lot of crappy digestion issues going on, because we know a lot of mold is going to be eliminated via the hepatobiliary system. So a lot of times we got to time up. Is it the appropriate time to really push and lean on detoxification? That's an important thing. We live in a generation where we know if we have some kind of a toxin exposure, some kind of a gut bug, we want to go after that right now. And sometimes we got to set the table for it, get the foundation moving so we can manage that better.
Yeah, well said. So let's chat on the sulfur piece. You brought up sulfur. So what are things we can do to boost sulfur? Because this is going to help with the salicylate problem. And then also, I know, boosting sulfur is going to help with detox, right? And it's going to help boost glutathione production too.
Great question. Let me share my screen here so you guys can see some stuff. All right. So this is one of the eating plans that I made, over the years. I'm changing it all the time for my patients to kind of help them, give them good feedback. But the key thing is we've got to have healthy levels of protein in every meal. All right. And so typically I'm doing a palm to a fist to a full hand of protein. Now, if I have someone coming in with really crappy digestion and they're maybe a previous vegan, they may only be able to handle like one bite of like salmon or something. Right. So this is like a general template, but it may not work for everyone depending on how bad your digestion is. I always tell patients the worse your digestion is, we lean to like gentle stews and soups where it's just easier on the body, easy to handle. And I try to, eat enough so someone can last about 4 to 5 hours. But sometimes if their digestion stinks, they may only be able to eat enough for 2 to 3 hours because a smaller amount of food, less food in your tummy, and then you just come back more frequently, right? It's not ideal in the, intermittent fasting, insulin sensitivity world, right? Because you want to have more time between meals and not be grazing all the time. But from a digestive health standpoint, that may be what's necessary. And then in general, just to look at my eating plan here, healthy proteins, healthy carbs, right? And you can see some of the carbs that are going to be higher in FODMAPs, right? You can see some of the autoimmune foods that are in red, right? So we want to avoid the autoimmune foods. We want to be doing more of our non-starchy vegetables without the F's next to them, ideally cooked, steamed, sauteed, and then avoiding some of the FODMAPs, right? Now, for my patients, I have an expandable FODMAP handout here. So it's more in depth, right? You'll see this come up in a second. This is helpful here. There's also a great app that I use for things that may be more nuanced called FODMAP A to Z. That's a great one. And then we use some of these oxalates. Like we'll look at some of the, like I try not to overthink it with the oxalates. I just try to look at and say like, what are the top 3 to 5 things that you're doing maybe on the oxalate side or on the salicylate side if they're really sensitive, right? We may just jump onto a carnivore diet and automatically eliminate these. We may just look at these more specifically and let's highlight the ones that are the most high. Right. And this is one given out by University of Pittsburgh Medical Center. But you can see we just try to look at the high ones and try to just replace them with a low one if we're seeing someone like, let's say, consume a lot of teas, right? Or we're seeing someone do a lot of nuts, right? And again, if you do like an autoimmune paleo template, guess what happens? You're already cutting out almonds. You're already cutting out nuts. You're already cutting out soy, right? So a lot of times we get a reduction doing some of like, the templates that I talk about here in my meal map just naturally. Okay. And then of course, if we have a lot of eczema issues, we may also be looking at this as well and trying to look at some of the higher salicylate foods here. And again, it gets overwhelming. So if you're, like I mentioned earlier, if you're coming into this with a standard American diet and you're not that great to begin with, don't worry about this. Forget about it. Just get a good foundation. Once the foundation's solid and you're not quite moving the needle, this is where you work with a practitioner to get to the next level. So I just don't want anyone coming in that doesn't have a great diet and looks at this and is like, holy crap, forget this. This is too confusing. Don't worry about that. Push that aside. This is for people that are already kind of flatlined on that, and there are options.
Agreed. Yeah. Well, you mentioned AIP is going to be eliminating a lot of this stuff anyway. So really we're talking about just other terms, other names for diets that have tons of overlap. That's the key thing that's coming out of this is like, whether it's animal based, whether it's full carnivore, whether it's autoimmune, there's so many overlapping things that are happening. You're reducing toxins, you're reducing anti-nutrients overall, you're going organic as much as possible. So I think it's important for people not to get caught up on the name or the term of what quote diet you're eating. We just want you to focus on what is going to make you feel the best. And in general, that's going to be organic pastured meats. And like you mentioned, if you're coming as a vegetarian vegan, maybe you can only do a bite of a grass-fed burger at first. Then we uncover you have all these gut infections. Now we fix the gut infections, boost up acid and enzymes. Now you could do a whole grass-fed burger and you feel better than ever compared to your 20 years of being a vegetarian, for example.
100%. Yeah.
Let's go back to the sulfur though. Those handouts were helpful. Let's go back to sulfur for a minute though. Things that we can do. We know like foods, for example. So like onions, garlic, which these may be FODMAP foods, right? So then we're going to coach you through this if we're working with you, but we want to go higher sulfur. So eggs are going to be good if you tolerate those. If you're on AIP, obviously you're not doing eggs.
So out of the gate here, like your proteins are going to be excellent for sulfur, right? They're going to be very high in cysteine and a lot of the sulfur-based amino acids. So any of your fish, eggs, if we can do it, darker cut meats are going to be higher, better in a lot of the sulfur amino acids. Some of the vegetables that are going to be more sulfur rich, they also may be higher in FODMAP. So we have to look at that. Collard greens, kale, they may be good, but they may also have some of these extra salicylates in there. So we have to look at the vegetable component and we have to look at the meat component. So the easiest thing out of the gate with sulfur is just meat if we're sensitive, because we're not going to get the anti-nutrients on the meat/protein side. And the key thing is, if we have digestive issues, we really have to lean on enzymes and acids and maybe bile if our stool's floating or it's taking excessive wipes to kind of clean yourself after number 2. So we got to look at those things, right? Got to make sure we're breaking everything down out of the gates there. And then outside of that, just making sure motility is good. If you start eating more protein, like start moving in the carnivore side, you may not pass as much stool just because a lot of this is going to be reabsorbed and not necessarily come out via fiber in your stool. So stool kind of motility may drop a little bit, and that may be on the normal side. Anything else you want to highlight here, Evan?
Yeah, well, here's something interesting. The point that we kind of have this convergence of diets, and it really just shows how sick and symptomatic the population is, because AIP used to be good enough. And now people are taking it to what I would consider almost more extreme level, where they're literally just doing meats. And of course, hopefully a lot of those people can do more animal based, which is what I would say my diet is, animal based, but then I have other foods. But man, if everyone is having to go from used to AIP used to clear everybody up, now we got to go carnivore to clear people up. That just goes to show just how sick as a population we really are. It's really quite alarming.
It is, absolutely is. And people need to remember, like, animal products are nutrient dense. And so if we're just relying on muscle meat, that's okay. If you're going more carnivore, try to lean into some bone broth if you can. Try to do a little bit of organ meat, or at least some organ meat capsules. And you really got to be careful with getting enough magnesium and potassium, because a lot of times those are going to be more in your green vegetables and plant food. So if you're going to be decreasing some of those things, you just got to make sure supplementally you have a good magnesium, potassium support. You're putting a lot of sea salt in your water and or on your meat when you're seasoning it. So you just got to be careful with those electrolyte things, which can be easily missed.
Yeah. So how do you boost sulfur to help the salicylate problem? We hit on the proteins. We hit on some of the other foods, like maybe some garlic, maybe some onion, some broccoli, things that are going to contain sulfur.
Yeah, and those are going to be high in FODMAP. So again, we have to dovetail that. This is where having a clinician going to help. Adding in HCl, adding in enzymes, being able to break down those foods, adding in collagen amino acids or bone broth, which is very high in glycine, which is very sulfur. We may need to add in some things like N-acetylcysteine. Again, it may not be great out of the gates. NAC is also a biofilm buster. So a lot of the high sulfur stuff can also knock down biofilms for the bacteria. So it just depends kind of where people are out of the gate. So what I tend to do is add in some gentle collagen amino acids, or some free form amino acids in a capsule form, maybe some bone broth, as long as there's no histamine issues, and really lean on digestive support. I'm going to do that out of the gates. And then maybe when it's time to do gut killing, maybe we'll add in some extra N-acetylcysteine or sulfur amino acids, whether it's just straight NAC, or I have a product called Detox Aminos that has calcium deglucarate in there, which is great for beta glucuronidase and mold detoxification too, and has a lot of all the other glutathione and NAC and methionine and cysteine and taurine, all those good things. So it just depends. Out of the gates, maybe we're just focusing on food, supplemental free-form aminos, collagen, and really working on digestion.
Yep. And if you've got a kid too, and you're trying to work stuff into their system, it may be a little harder. Epsom salt baths could go a really long way. Yes. And then liposomal glutathione in a liquid form. So there are some really good like syrups and some things that you and I use clinically, which can be helpful. So it's not mandatory that you go to the glutathione level, but that is a really good way to help a lot of different mechanisms, because you're going to be mobilizing and pushing toxins out and protecting them too. It's a really powerful antioxidant. So we really like glutathione for kids. And typically we're going to go like a quarter of an adult dose, depending on the weight of the kid. So if it's a young kid we're working with, if a normal dose is a teaspoon, we may come in quarter teaspoon instead, or maybe we go half a teaspoon. And then also you mentioned magnesium. So we could do magnesium oil. You could do magnesium lotion. You could do magnesium drinks. If you could get your kid to drink some magnesium, there's some good options there too.
Yeah. Magnesium is very helpful for brain inflammation, right? Russell Blaylock, retired neurosurgeon, talked about the fact that when he would give his patients magnesium post-brain surgery, they healed exponentially faster compared to patients he didn't give it to. So we know magnesium is very, very powerful with brain inflammation. Obviously, if you have gut issues, doing Epsom salt baths absorbs it transdermally, right? Flotation tanks, same thing, very helpful. And again, if you're a mom or dad and you're listening to this, and you're just trying to get your kids to eat blueberries away from the crackers, do that first, right? Do that first. I mean, there's a lot of studies on eating blueberries and some of these low sugar fruits and being incredibly anti-inflammatory to the brain. Go there first. If you're having a reaction, then we step it up into gear. So my son was born, I think it was last year. He was 6 months old, and he was having a lot of eczema issues. And we had to really work on going AIP and low salicylate to get the eczema down. Now, once we worked on gut and digestion and good bacteria balance, we were able to add these foods back in, and it wasn't as big of a deal. And when you're younger at that age, there's some immune issues that tend to happen in that first year of life. And so we were able to get through that point, and his eczema really never came back, and unless we eat certain foods that we know are not on his plan. But out of the gates, we had to be more restrictive with salicylates, and then we were able to pull back on that down the road.
Well, the gut's more leaky as a young baby like that anyway, yes. Right? So I think it's somewhat normal to have to be a little bit more restricted with young kids, because their guts are forming so they can really absorb all the breast milk. So I think you did a good job. And I think this is important to remind people that all these different tweaks These are really just tools, but really you got to get to the big thing here, which is a mast cell problem, generally a mast cell activation that's causing you to be so darn sensitive, whether it's chemical sensitivity you deal with, which could also be common. So if you notice you're having salicylate, oxalate problems, histamine problems, you could have maybe chemical sensitivity or other reactions as well. And you got to get to the root of it. For me, the root of it was tick bites and mold, and I'm slowly chipping away at those things. So I think you just got to keep digging deeper. Don't just stop at the diet. Get the diet dialed in enough to have you stable. And then once you're stable, you're going to investigate these other things. Don't just do diet and think that's the end of the road for me. I'll just never eat blueberries again. That's not a way to live.
No. And again, those foods are relatively healthy and they're very nutrient dense. There's a lot of good phytonutrients in there. So if we can have it in, and plus, I'd much rather have my kids eat blueberries than crackers or any other sweets. That's way better. So yeah. So we gotta, we gotta make sure we're seeing the forest to the trees here. So we have a big picture where, right, we're focused on what our goal is now, but then what's the big picture in the long run?
Yeah. So just to wrap up, last thing on the testing front, we're going to look at an organic acids on you. We're going to look at candida. We're going to measure oxalates. We're going to look at bacterial overgrowth. We're going to look at stool for any type of infections, gut inflammation. We're going to look at any type of pancreatic enzyme deficiencies. We're going to look at fat digestion problems. So just with stool and urine, to be honest, I think you could get a ton of information.
100%, man. Well, anyone listening and you guys enjoy the content, please feel free and share it with family and friends. Give us a share on your social. We really appreciate it. Put your comments below. Let us know what you've done that's been helpful for you in the past. Also, if you want to reach out and get support from Evan and I, we are available worldwide. Love to be able to help you. We'll put links down below, evanbrand.com to reach out to Evan, justinhealth.com to reach out to Dr. J and myself. We are here to help you, ready to serve. You guys have a phenomenal weekend, and we'll be in touch.
Take care now.
Take care. Bye.
Got a question for Dr. J? Go to beyondwellnessradio.com and click the questions button. Then tune in to hear the answer. Also, if you like the show, click below to review us on iTunes. For more Beyond Wellness Radio, go to beyondwellnessradio.com.